So what we will start with, I'll give you a quick demo of how I can onboard using cloud connectors, Tenable Cloud Connectors. And then because Tenable Cloud Connectors, I can only use for that you need access to the cloud environment and you need administrative access to the cloud. And this is one-time configuration. So probably if you're working as an admin, this is an opportunity for you to see how do we configure Cloud Connector. And if you're working as part of a team wherein Tenable product is already deployed and you are more of a vulnerability management consumer of that product, then you would see that how connector is working. So let me give you a quick demo of Tenable Cloud Connector. Now, before we do Cloud Connector, we need to understand this part. So what we are talking about here is, let's understand this from diagram. So let's say this is your Microsoft Azure Cloud. We're talking about Tenable Cloud Connector, and I'm taking the example of Azure. So this is my Microsoft Azure Cloud. In this Microsoft Azure Cloud, I have a couple of assets. For example, I have a couple of virtual machines. There are hundreds of thousands. I am just able to draw 4 in this over here. So these are my assets that I want to scan using Tenable. This is where Tenable is. Now Tenable Vulnerability Management is also in the cloud. So I'm just making it, drawing it right next to it simultaneously because they both are cloud. They both are in cloud and we are here on planet Earth. So this is Tenable Vulnerability Management. Now Tenable Vulnerability Management should be able to authenticate it should be able to authenticate to Azure Cloud. So it should be able to authenticate to Azure Cloud so that it can quickly discover all of these virtual machines, network which are there in Azure, as well as applications which are in Azure. So it needs to authenticate to Azure Cloud. Now Azure Cloud has its own concepts, which is known as tenant and subscription. That's the concept of Azure Cloud. Azure Cloud has a tenant and a subscription. And it should need to authenticate. It should be able to authenticate to Azure, which means that in Microsoft Azure, there is a service which is responsible for authentication, which is responsible for accepting credentials from Tenable. When Tenable Vulnerability Management module tries to communicate with Azure, whenever it needs to update these assets, whenever it needs to discover more assets, or it needs to run subsequent discovery scans, it will authenticate to Azure. And Azure will then authorize Tenable Vulnerability Management to have this asset information discovered, updated, and available. So which means there is an authentication which is happening. And here we are not talking about users, we're talking about application. So Azure is an application, Tenable is an application. Two applications are trying to authenticate with obviously I'm saying it's one-way authentication. Tenable Vulnerability Management application is trying to authenticate to Azure. In Azure, we use a service with the name Microsoft. In Azure, the service that we use for authentication is known as Entra ID, which used to be known as Azure AD until October last year. Then they renamed it to Entra ID. This is the service in Azure that is responsible for authentication and authorization because this is the identity provider of Azure. So Tenable Vulnerability Management will basically use certain credentials with which it will approach Azure every hour, every 4 hours, depending on the discovery configuration that you will enable to Azure, and it will say, hey, here's my credential, allow me to discover your systems, and Azure will validate and allow to discover. That's what connectivity is all about. That's how connectivity works. Now, whether it is Azure, whether I draw another circle, let's say for AWS, the concept will remain the same. It's just that the service name in AWS will change. If this is AWS, then the service name will be IAM Identity Center. because AWS uses a different service for it, which is known as IAM Identity Center. Similarly, if it is Google, then the service name will be Cloud Identity. So the IDP service will change. That will be responsible for authorization, authentication, and authorization. So I'll show you how do we authenticate to Microsoft Azure connector. So for that, I'll first log into Microsoft Azure. This process hardly takes 10 minutes to get configured. Understand the process so that if you get an opportunity, you can also configure it. So I'm logging into Azure portal now. All right, so I'm logged into Azure. This is my Azure tenant or Azure subscription. If I go to virtual machines, I will see no virtual machines is here. Probably he has deleted all the virtual machines, but we will create virtual machines here. In fact, I will give you access to the same tenant so that you can build virtual machines in Azure in AWS that you will discover through scanner as well as agent. So here, this is where you will create virtual machines. Now, how do we configure the authentication? So I'll navigate to Entra ID. This is the service, Entra ID. In the service, you will need to create app registration. You will need to create a registration. So I'll click on new registration and I'll type the registration name as, let's say, Tenable Vulnerability Management is the registration name. Then who can use this? I'll say accounts in this directory can use it. And then I'll click this, create this application. So it is like creating, see, for a human being, it is always username and password. A human being authenticates with the help of username and password. However, application authenticates with the help of service principal or service account. You must have heard the concept of service account. Now, service account also resembles a user account, but the difference between user account and service account is that a user account is one-to-one relationship, one user, one account. Service account is one-to-many. One service account is configured with multiple applications. User account may have varying level of permissions, admin, normal user, middle user, different types of user. But service accounts are typically admin credentials. They are configured with admin credentials or privileges because they are used for authentication. User account may have a password policy because of which user is required to change the password every 45 days, 60 days. But service accounts do not have password policy. User accounts may get logged, they may get disabled. Service accounts do not get logged, do not get disabled, and their password never expires. So they have a special treatment because they are being used by applications for authentication. Same is the concept in cloud. The change is it is known as service principal or application authentication. So in cloud, we create an application, and in this application, we use username and password to authenticate. However, the username and password will not be username and password. It will be known as this. So you basically need this information. So I'll open a notepad. I will need these pieces of information. I need application ID. This is my application ID. So I'll copy the application ID. Then I will need directory ID, which is my tenant ID. And then I will need secret. These three pieces of information I need: application ID, directory ID, and secret. Or I would say directory ID on the top, and then application ID and secret. So how will I get the secret? For secret, I will click on manage. click on certificates and secrets, and I'll click on new client secret. I'll create a secret. I'll say this is my TVM secret. The secret is valid for a maximum of 6 months. You can, the secret expires in 6 months, then you can create another secret. I'll click on add. So I've got this secret. Now this is the value that I need, this value. You only see this value once. After you move from this page, you will lose this value. So I'll copy this value, which is secret value. That's the 3 pieces of information that I need. If I just refresh this page, I will lose this value. You only see it once as per the design. Now I can't see it. I can only delete it and create a new secret. Now let's understand. Let's match this. This is your login URL. This is your username. And this is your password. That's it. So when Tenable would need to discover Azure resources once and on periodic basis, when Tenable would need to run a vulnerability scan for Azure assets, Tenable would use this login URL to approach Azure, and then Tenable will provide this username and password to Azure. So Tenable will basically approach. Now Azure has multiple tenants. There are multiple customers. So Tenable would need to reach to the right customer environment, the one that you have configured, that is differentiated with this ID. This is the directory ID, that which directory of Azure you want to authenticate to. Directory means which customer's tenant of Azure you want to authenticate to. And once you reach to the directory ID, then the directory would say, so once Tenable reaches here to the right directory, Entra ID tenant, Entra ID would say who you are. Do you have credentials? Are you an authenticated user? And at that point in time, Tenable will supply this credential. Tenable will say, yes, I have this application ID and this is the secret. With this application ID and secret, Entra ID, the directory service will check whether these application ID and secrets is correct. Since they are correct, Entra ID would allow access to Tenable. That's the concept. That's what happens in the backend with the connector. So this is how Tenable can log in. But then the question is, what level of access is provided to Tenable Vulnerability Management application? That question still remains the same. This is basically the accessing the environment. But what level of access? There are 2 types of access. One is read-only access. With the read-only access, Tenable will be able to discover the assets and run a vulnerability scan. With the read-only access, it will be able to discover the assets and run a vulnerability scan. Give me a moment. So it will be able to discover the assets and run a vulnerability scan with read-only access. Then there will be another access, which is contributor access. With this level of access, it will be remediate. It will be able to perform remediation activities. Because in remediation activities, you would want to modify the configuration of an asset. I'm saying if you want to install a patch, it's like modifying the configuration. If you want to make some changes, it's modifying the configuration. So with contributor access, it will be able to perform remediation activities, and with read-only access, it will be able to discover the assets and it will be able to run a vulnerability scan on the assets. So these are 2 types of access. So what we will do right now, we will grant Tenable service. We will grant Tenable read-only access. To whom we are granting read-only access? To this application that we have created, because this is Tenable Vulnerability Management application. Tenable is using this application credential. So this application needs access to assets. So what I will do, I will navigate to subscriptions. Subscriptions are the container for resources in Azure, where you have all the virtual machines, virtual network, or the Azure resources or services configured. So I'll navigate to the subscription, and to this subscription, I will grant Tenable reader access. So in the subscription, I'll click on access control. This is how you grant access in Azure to any service. Then I'll click on add role assignment. I'll select reader role, click on next. Here I select the member to whom I'm assigning this role. And in the search, I will select Tenable. So it will show me this application, Tenable Vulnerability Management. So what I'm doing, I'm assigning reader access or read-only access to Tenable Vulnerability Management application on Microsoft Azure. So this access is assigned, role is assigned, my prerequisites is done. I have taken care of all the prerequisites. I have got the directory ID, application ID, secret, and appropriate role is also assigned to the application. Now with this three pieces of configuration, I will create the connector. So let's go to Tenable module and let's configure the connector. Okay, meanwhile, it was in so hurry that it removed. I'm logged in. So Tenable signs UI out after a couple of minutes of inactivity. So I come back to the same window. Is everyone with me on this? This is the last leg of configuration.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll navigate to Tenable Vulnerability Management. Then I click on Settings, come at the bottom, which is Cloud Connectors. And then I'll click on Create Cloud Connector. I'll select Microsoft Azure connector and it will show me the configuration. It says, please provide this information and you're good to go. So I'll provide the connector name. I'll say Azure connector and I'll put today's date, which is November 11th, 2024, just to differentiate because I also have one from my previous subscription, which I lost access. Then it says application ID. So it will ask me for the application ID. Here's the application ID. I can keep it here. You need to make sure that you copy it properly. If it has a space, the connector will fail. Then it says tenant ID, which is this. Tenant ID or directory ID is one and the same thing. Then it says secret. Secret is like password. And here is my password. When you will configure a connector for AWS, I'll see if I can give you a demo tomorrow for AWS also. These steps will be a bit different, but the concept will remain the same. So I provided the application ID, tenant ID, and client secret. That's it. After that, it says auto account discovery. Now, my tenant, my directory may have multiple subscriptions. In a production Azure account, in one tenant, you will have multiple subscriptions. So if I say auto account discovery, it will automatically discover the subscriptions. If I want to put any specific subscription, I can add that subscription also by unchecking it and by typing the subscription ID here. So I want it to do auto discovery. So I'll say do an auto discovery, find out all the subscriptions which are part of this tenant. And then it says select or create a network. I'll just keep it default. And then it says schedule import. This basically means discovery scans. So I can run a scan. 1 minute will not work here. It will not unless this save and import option is not highlighted, which means something is wrong. So what is wrong here is 1 minute. Tenable doesn't allow to run a cloud connector, to import or to run discovery scan every minute. The minimum duration that it allows is every hour. So you can see the moment I say hour, it accepts me. The moment I say minute, it is not accepting me. 1 hour, it is accepting. Or I can say 1 day, 2 day, 3 days, whatever. So I say, let's run a scan every hour. So what it will do, the connector will trigger this Tenable connector will approach Microsoft Azure tenant with these credentials and say, I have come, please allow me access so that I can run a discovery and I can see that if there is any change that has happened from the last discovery that I ran. Probably in the last discovery, a machine was available and now you have more machines, or a machine that I have as an asset is not available. So I will delete it from my system. So it will run that discovery every hour and it will update the assets accordingly. So I'll click on save. The moment I click on save, it will add that connector and it says you can see importing. So whether you click on save and import or you click on save only, it will automatically start the importing exercise. However, it will not be importing anything because in that subscription, you can see I don't have any virtual machine right now. I don't have any virtual machine. So what I'll do, I'll quickly create a virtual machine so that we'll take a break. Once we come from break, you will see that Tenable will quickly discover this virtual machine.
So Raghu, I have one question here. So there in yeah, actually there was a option in that select or create the network. So in which case we need to create or select that network.
Network is nothing but a default container. Network basically means when you have multiple cloud connectors, you would want to differentiate those cloud connectors. That's where you create a network.
Okay,
That's
okay, fine.
it's not that network that you think of. It's just a different.
Okay, okay. Okay.
So for example, I'm creating a virtual machine, let's say Windows 10 virtual machine in Azure. You will also create virtual machines. Uh, so I'm just creating that virtual machine with default configuration.
Raghu, one question from my side. Puneet here.
Please ask.
As we have created a correct connector, in that option list, we have an option like auto discovery is on, and we have put that on, correct? If
Yep,
we select that option and we just created that connector, auto discovery will automatically initiated at the background, correct?
absolutely.
And one more thing, let's say Tenable is discovering the Azure connector. Whatever the host is assigned in my Azure uh, service account, okay, it will automatically, getting discovered by the auto discovery scan, or we need to initiate a separate scan just to get all the data from all the hosts.
No, you have decided the scan duration, which is every hour. So every hour, Tenable Cloud Connector will get activated. It will approach Azure. It will see how many additional assets are there, how many existing assets are deprecated. It will try to replicate and have the same information. I'm saying it will have the same information in Tenable. So you will
And
have the same assets in Tenable all the time.
I'm asking for the initial stage.
Initial stage.
Yes, let's say we are doing this practice. Let's assume we have 10 hosts. Okay,
Mhm.
we have 10 hosts and we have only one service account. Okay, one
Uh,
service account is attached to 10 different hosts which are created in Microsoft Azure. Okay,
which
and
so what is your reference of service account here? What do you mean by service account?
like we did created like just created we just
This
created
account,
yeah, this one.
this account is tagged with the directory, not with a host, which means I'm saying this account. That's the reason I tried to replicate it with user account. I said that this is equivalent to a username, this is equivalent to a password, and this is your login URL, which basically means once you authenticate to this directory, this is your
Mhm.
directory means your Microsoft Azure account structure. So in
Mhm.
Azure account hierarchy, it starts with a directory. You're given a directory. Inside that directory, you have multiple subscriptions, and inside subscriptions, you have resources. It is like
Yes, yes,
you
yes,
get to
that's
the directory to the top level, which
yes,
means
yes, yes.
now if you have multiple subscriptions, multiple virtual machines, this credentials will have access to everything. So every
Okay.
time you run discovery, every hour when you run the discovery, whatever changes are there or whatever is the current status of your subscriptions or virtual machines, it will automatically synchronize with Tenable. That's what it will do.
Got it.
Make sense?
Got it.
You're configuring it. You're configuring it for your directory, top level domain.
Got it. Whatever assigned in whatever subscription we have taken from the Azure, whatever hosts are assigned against that subscription, we will get directly to the tenant.
Yeah. For example, you can see it here. Once again, I click on connector. You can see here, it says auto account discovery because you're typing the tenant ID. Now, tenant have multiple accounts. It can have one subscription, to a subscription, 200 subscriptions. That's the reason what I did. I intentionally enabled this service rather disabling it and manually typing it the subscription ID. Because if I manually type the subscription ID, then what it will do, it will only discover that subscription ID and it will disregard all other containers. But when I say auto account discovery, it will automatically discover all the accounts and all those accounts, assets of those accounts will be listed here. That's the logic.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah. Now, for example, if I show you this connector, the one which is already configured, Tenable, this connector, you can see in this connector, I have enabled auto account discovery. It is scheduled to run every 30 minutes. And then you can see it has been able to identify. This was in the last scan. Whenever it ran the last scan, it was able to identify one subscription because there was only one subscription. But if I had it disabled, then it would only identify the one that I manually put here. That's the logic.
Got it.
The minimum is 30 minutes actually. Here I can see view event history. It shows me all the events. You can see time spent 9:13, which is 9:18. So it says imported 0 assets. Imported 0 assets. So you can see it is running the scan, every 30 minutes. 8:43 it ran a scan. 8:13 it ran a scan. Then 9:13 it is ran a scan. 8:43 it ran a scan. And it is importing 0 assets. Why it is importing 0 assets here? Because there has not been any change in the number of assets after the connector was configured. In my account, I had 9 assets and those 9 assets are the same since yesterday. Now it shows you the 130 events here, total 130, page 1 of 3. If I go to the last page, you can see here when I configured this connector yesterday, during the daytime, I was just testing it yesterday. You can see when I configured it at the first time in the afternoon, it was able to find 9 VMs. There were 9 VMs in my subscription. And after that, the connector was running every 30 minutes. And you can see after it found those 9 VMs, there was no change in my environment. So every 30 minutes it is running and it is not importing anything because there is no change. So I can see all the information into the event history to validate the status. Make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I'll refresh the screen. Great. So you can see it has been scheduled. Schedule means it is running every hour. If I want to change the schedule, I can click on it. It will take me to the configuration. And the minimum is 30 minutes that I can do. I can try 29 minutes. It will probably fail. See, it says no, 29 minutes is not allowed. 30 minutes is allowed. So I can save it. So which means it will run every 30 minutes. Now, since I have just reconfigured it, it will run the import exercise once again. The reason I reconfigured it, because my virtual machine is deployed in Azure, and this time it will be able to find this VM. Sample VM it will quickly pick up from Azure. So once this is configured, once this connector is configured, we are done with the job. Now we don't need to come back to this window unless there are issues with the connector. Anything that you would see as a result of this connector execution, you will see it under assets. When you click on assets, you will see all your assets listed here. All your assets will be listed here. Right now, you only see 2 assets because there are some filters which are configured here. So I'll clear all filters and then you see all the assets here. See, a lot of assets are there. You can also see that these assets are from AWS and somehow it does not, these assets are from from Azure, and you can see, let's see all, this is the asset. See, sample VM, this is the VM name here. It has discovered it. Sample VM, you can verify the IP address. This sample VM has an IP address which is 10.0.0.4. This is the sample VM. You can see here 10.0.0.4. The public IP is 14.240, which is the last digits, 14.240. It has quickly discovered it. It is showing you from which subscription and resource it is discovering it. It is showing you Azure VM ID. It is showing you first seen. So this VM was first seen at 9:20 today, and last seen is 9:20 today. Now, after 30 minutes, it will run the scan once again, and it will not find anything if I have not added anything. So 9:20, it has seen this VM. And this, the source of this VM, how did this asset appear into Tenable Vulnerability Management? It is coming from Cloud Discovery Connector. That's how you can.
Raghu, one question. Sorry to interrupt. From
Mhm.
where we can check the time zone, like on which time zone Tenable is working on?
Which time zone Tenable? Tenable uses the same time zone of your system. It uses.
Because most of the time, what happens, we are accessing clients, the client VM. So we are not able to identify like which time zone he's working on. So from Tenable, where we can see that which time zone actually he's following.
Which time zone? You mean say Tenable time zone?
No. Like 9:20 p.m. It's IST,
Actually, he meant to say
correct?
that our customer is, in UK. Okay.
Hmm.
So, and the scanning is happening on the Indian time, right?
Hmm.
So once we will share that report to our client, so client will ask us, means the time is mismatching or like of thing. Means he want to see that result in UK time as well, right, Puneet?
That's the first case. The second case is like here says asset scan information first seen 11th of November 2024 at 9:20 p.m. 9:20 p.m. IST or which time zone?
IST. That's a, see, we are on 9:24 p.m. 4 minutes ago, this VM was discovered.
No.
This is the
We
same
know
VM.
9:20 because this Tenable we are accessing from India. Okay. That's why we are able to identify IST. Okay. But in Tenable, is there any option in the settings like which time zone it is configured?
Which time zone it is configured. See,
Yes.
what I can tell you, if you log into Tenable console from a
Mhm.
VM, let's say if I log into this console from an Azure VM which is in US, it will
Mhm.
automatically show the local time zone there. So it will automatically convert that to EST, the time zone of the local system where you are accessing the portal. That's how the logic is. So since I'm accessing this portal in India, it is showing me IST. When I access this portal from a virtual machine, let's say this is the virtual machine. This virtual machine is in Canada Central. So automatically when I log into Tenable portal in this virtual machine, it will show the local time zone of Canada Central. That's how it
Let's say my Tenable is configured in Australia, Sydney region.
it
Okay.
will send in the report. That will be the universal time zone, which is GMT. It will show the UTC. In the scan report, it will show UTC.
UTC.
The customer will automatically convert it.
Let's say if I want to fetch a report as per IST time standards,
Mhm.
is there any option how we can change it through
Yes,
Tenable?
when we reach the reporting part, then you will see it.
Oh, okay.
That what are
No
my
issue.
options. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Right now, it shows me. Right now, you just need to remember that the time zone shown is always the local time zone of the system where you are accessing the
From
Tenable.
where we are accessing the Tenable console, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, example, this VM is discovered just now, and this VM was discovered by a Cloud Discovery Connector, which is at 9:20, right? So this VM was discovered just now. Now, just to show this connector configuration, what I'll do, I'll create one more VM because I know my next scan will run at 9:50, 30 minutes from now. So I'll create one more VM real quick. And then before we end the session today, you would see that the cloud discovery connector would be able to discover this VM also in the next scan. Then we'll take a break for 10 minutes and then we'll come back. Virtual machine name is, let's say, now I'll give it a meaningful name. I'll say Windows 2K16. I'm deploying a Windows 2016 virtual machine, which is server virtual machine. Canada Central, no infrastructure redundancy required. You will all provision virtual machines tomorrow. Then you will understand the virtual machine provisioning in Azure. Right now, I'm just quickly provisioning it. I forgot to check the box for license agreement. Now the validation passed. So it is submitting for deployment. All right. So this VM is also getting provisioned, which means at 9:50, when Tenable runs another scan, schedule discovery scan, as per half an hour interval that I've configured, it would be quickly able to discover this VM also. And if I delete my sample VM, then it would remove sample VM from its inventory and add this new VM into the inventory. So Tenable Cloud Connector would always try to synchronize the status from the subscription that is configured to. That's what it will do. Okay, is everyone with me on this?
Yeah.
Sure. So it's 9:45, around 9:50, we'll navigate to the console and we will see the other VM also, which is this VM. Which is Windows 2K16 VM. That will also be added. That will also be discovered into the console. Okay, now let's understand the last concept for today, which is tagging. This is very important concept because Tenable has a huge dependency on tagging. You will need to tag each and every resource that you have in Tenable, because when you perform a vulnerability scan, it will ask you either to provide the IP address, and IP addresses are suggested to provide when you are running an external scan. But in Tenable, you can provide the tags and automatically the scan will the asset will be included in that scan. So you basically create tags here. Now, if you see here, what all information do I get over here? Let me refresh it first. So if you see here, I see the name comes as it is available in the other side, wheresoever this host is coming from. This basically is the encryption score. So you can see here, this is the asset criticality score. So I'll talk about this. This is the criticality which is coming about asset. I will say once an asset is onboarded into the Tenable, it takes time. It takes up to 24 hours to update these scores. So we'll talk about it tomorrow. Then IPv4 address, the operating system of that asset, we basically get. And then we get the last seen. When was the last time that asset was seen? And the source of that asset. For example, if you see carefully that this asset, this is an Amazon AWS EC2 instance, the virtual machine in Azure. The same virtual machine in Azure is known as Amazon EC2 instance in AWS. So this is an Amazon EC2 instance, and I am discovering this EC2 instance through Nessus agent. This has come through the agent. These two machines that you see here, Nessus scan, this is basically coming from the scanner appliance, the scanner sensor. And the remaining virtual machines, you can see I have a combination of everything. which means I have some hosts which are discovered through agent, Nessus agent. I have some hosts which are discovered through Nessus scanner appliance, the scanner sensor, and I have some hosts which are discovered through cloud discovery connector. So I have a combination of hosts which are getting discovered from various methods through which you can discover and onboard host or assets into Tenable. Then it provides some tags. You see some tags here. These are the tags which are available. Then comes resource tags. Now this resource tag is basically coming from resource itself, which basically means now these resources that you see here, these resources were part of other subscription to which I lost access. So I'll directly talk about this resource, sample VM, which has just been discovered. Now, if you look at this VM tags information will also come. For example, this resource tag, it is empty. What I'll do, I'll go to this VM, sample VM, and I'll add a tag here to this VM, edit, and I'll add a tag. For example, purpose, Tenable VM training. The purpose of this VM is Tenable VM training. Owner is myself, Raghuveer Singh, and validity, I'll type the date, let's say November 18th, 2026, 2024, and I will save this information. So now I'm assigning 3 tags to this VM, and I'm assigning it at the right time because at sharp 9:50 the scan will run. So the tags are assigned. Okay. Now the VM has 3 tags: purpose, owner, and validity. If I go to the Tenable screen and refresh the screen, you will notice that there is no tag which is shown right now for this VM. Sample VM, once again, there is no tag which is shown. Resource tag is empty. Now the scan is running. It is sharp 9:50. So I suppose the cloud discovery connector will start to run the scan. And as part of that scan, it will update all the assets. So for example, on an existing asset which is already added, sample VM, I have made some configuration changes. I have added some resource tag at the so this information will get updated. The second thing, in the Azure portal, I have an additional asset added, which is Windows 2K16 after the previous
Hello,
was completed. So what will happen?
hello.
Go on mute.
हाँ मैं
Amit, go on
मैं
mute.
ट्रेनिंग खत्म.
So what will happen? The sample VM configuration will be updated in the next discovery scan, and this new VM, this additional VM will be added to the assets under assets properties. So let's see that happening or not. But before that, let's go and see the status of connector, what's happening at the connector right now. We'll go to Cloud Connector. It says schedule scan. This is the connector. We'll just refresh it. I'll click on the connector. I'll go to event history. If I want to check whether the scan ran or not. No, so that scan has not yet run. The last scan was ran at 9:20. So let me check the configuration, what it is configured with. It is configured to run the scan, right? So obviously there could be a delay of 1 or 2 minutes here and there. You cannot expect it to be so much accurate or punctual. Typically it should be, but that's okay. It runs import every 30 minutes. So it should be running a scan at any moment. Okay, it has still not started that scan. That's okay. So what I'll do, since we are running at the end of the session, instead of waiting, I will probably trigger that scan once again. So how can I trigger that scan? I'll go to the connector and I'll just make it 31 minutes. You just need to make some changes and save it. As soon as you save it, it will initiate the scan. It will initiate the import. Import. So I'll click on import and it will start the import process. Import initiated. I'm saying here it continues to say status as scheduled, so you don't need to worry about it, but it has initiated the imports process. I'll go to event history and I can see that it initiated the process at 9:30, 9:53, which is the time frame right now. 9:53 it initiated the process. It stated it does the full sync and it could find two VMs. It could found two VMs because we have two VMs. Syncing terminated, VM start, checking for terminated. It looks for terminated assets also. I will say any VM that it had which got terminated at source, which is not available at source, then it needs to remove that also from here. Send total zero out, total of zero assets out of one. Finish scan, importing zero assets, syncing subscriptions. It is subscription syncing it. Okay, imported assets, zero assets. Now we'll go to the assets and we'll see the information. So assets. And look at the number. Number is now 14. And we have the other VM also. So this is sample VM. This is 2016 VM. This is the VM. No, this is not the one. So let's refresh. I'm saying we are trying to do things so quickly. It doesn't happen like this in real world. In real world, you do the configuration and then you wait for it to take effect. Okay, let's look for the other VM, sample VM. Remember, we made changes to the configuration of this VM, and there you go. You can see those changes. Resource tag validity November 18th, owner Raghuveer Singh, purpose Tenable VM training. So which basically means that the last scan that I initiated that actually ran fine, uh, which was able to look for any configuration changes that was done from the previous scan, and it updated that configuration changes. You can see first scene was 9:20 and the last scene was 9:53. So at 9:53 it was able to search for it. And where is my other VM? I'm saying it is there, one of this VM. I just need to search for it. This is the VM. Yep, you can see first scene 9:53 and last scene 9:53. You can validate whether it is the same VM. IP address is 10.0.0.5 and the public IP ends at 61.156. It is here. IP address you can check 10.0.5 and 61.156. So yes, both the VMs are up to date now. So this was about Cloud Connector, which is a great service to quickly discover all the cloud resources. If your organization is cloud heavy, which means you have majority of the workloads and application hosted in cloud, then I would suggest to use Cloud Connectors and also use Tenable Cloud Security module, which is a separate licensed module that will help you to uh, that provides you capabilities similar to Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Since you guys work with Defender for Cloud, it provides you similar capabilities, wherein you will be able to see the secure score, you will be able to provide cloud native application security capabilities. All that is available in Tenable Cloud Security module. And Cloud Connector is a common configuration for both cloud security as well as Tenable Vulnerability Management. So now we have seen this capability in vulnerability management. Today we completed the connector part. Tomorrow we will be starting with scanner and then we will look at agent, and we are targeting to complete the lab configuration to lab configuration tomorrow, so that by the end of the session we would run a few scans and then we would leave them up and running, and then day after tomorrow when we reconvene the session we would look at the status of those scans, whether those scans got completed. If yes, then did they find any vulnerability? If yes, then what are those vulnerabilities? All that we will look on day after tomorrow. So that's the agenda for tomorrow and day after tomorrow, other than covering the theoretical aspects. And then I will also show you the tagging concept tomorrow, because by that time I would probably have sorted out my Azure issue. If not, then I will use the same subscription, the one that I use today, to provision the resources. And you all have been granted access to the subscription. I'll share your credentials tomorrow. So in this subscription, you will be provisioning host, and you will also be provisioning host in the other subscription. So here you can see your accounts are already configured. It's just that we've almost reached to the end of the session. So I will probably share this configuration with you tomorrow in a spreadsheet. And you don't need to configure MFA for Azure. It is not needed by default. In Azure, it is optional. You want to do it, do it. You don't want to do it, you don't do it. So you will have your assets configured in both Azure and AWS, and then you will have these assets onboarded into Tenable with the help of scanner appliance, scanner sensor, as well as agent, as well as cloud connector. That's what we are going to do tomorrow. Any questions so far, guys? All right, then we are good. We can close the session now. I will see you all tomorrow, and then we'll continue from here. Thank you.